And with that, I'm happy to start our debate on digital privacy, trust, responsibility, and ethics. We have a great panel. I'm going to introduce the first person for it, the moderator. Please welcome Sherry Greenberg, a professor of practice at the UT LBJ School and the chair of the Good Systems Initiative at the University of Texas at Austin.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you all for being here this evening. I would like to have our panelists come on up. I'm taking you in the order that I see you on the screen. David Dunmeyer, Texas Public Policy Foundation. Adita, you've already heard about. Come on up, Adita. Anastasia, come on up. Privacy Podcast. Jay Williams, come on up. I'm not going to read their bios because you can go straight to the website and see them. What a week. It was just over a week ago that the normal buzz about AI and privacy and trust was amplified. As you will recall, on Monday, October 30th, not a surprise, we'd all been warned or forewarned, President Biden released his executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence. How's that for a mouthful? So AI, as we know, is everywhere. Digital privacy, trust, responsibility, and ethics is something that should be of concern, I say, to all of us. We may have different views, and in fact, I know we do, but it's a topic that all of us should pay attention to. And in fact, if we look at polling, Pew did a poll August 28th, just this past August, and the question was whether there was public trust in AI and in technology in our daily lives. Well, guess what? Trust is diminishing. When they did the poll in 2021, 37% of people were concerned. 2023, 52% were concerned. So with that, we're going to start our debate. Debaters, you know that I will be calling on you, and don't worry, I'm not going to call the first person first every time. I'll mix it up a bit. You have a 2-minute maximum response. Green is go, red is stop. Okay. And you're going to kind of be on the honor system because there are 4 of you, and I'm going to be asking questions and looking at the screen. You only get 2 rebuttals. You don't have to use them both, but that's for the entire night and only 60 seconds. So are we ready, debaters? All right. Well, let's get started. First, is privacy a human right? In other words, should there be legal rights and protections for digital privacy and identity? Now, this time, Jay, I will start here with you. Yes, and?
I've got my clock right here. So
Yes, there we go.
now we're on. All right. Now everybody's like, oh no, Jay.
Okay. It's privacy, human rights. Should there be legal rights and protections for digital privacy and identity? Go.
Yes, was the short answer. But the long answer is that we have a long history of evolving human rights. And one of the things that we did when we started doing things like the internet was we really didn't think about what was going to be the result of the outcome of all of us placing everything we own about ourselves digitally online. And so many things and many choices that we made, just like every time that we've created a new country or created a new way of doing things or creating a new industry, all the way from classical times to date, we've had to modify the way that we think around the rule of law to support different kinds of rights. So we created a Bill of Rights when we created the United States to do those kinds of things. We've amended those rights over time. And now we're at the state to where we need to consider how are the kinds of things that we do online governed by those kinds of rights. And because we haven't done that, we have problems with security. We have problems with phishing, right? And I don't mean phishing, right? I mean, people, using your identity in naughty ways. I mean, people, pretending to be other people, people creating identity theft things that we constantly do, not to mention the structures of digital advertising in the $2.5 trillion industry that drives taking our behavior and monetizing it for other people besides ourselves and others' gain. So we're definitely in the age to where we need to think about new definitions of human rights and new ways that we can connect those rights to the concept of law that we use to maintain everything.
Anastasia, same question.
You'll get no argument for me. Absolutely, privacy is a human right, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights agrees. I don't think that I'll find anybody in the audience that disagrees. And given that that declaration is a foundational document for a number of international treaties and laws, I think perhaps even the world is in agreement. The better question then, if we're all in agreement that it is a human right, is should it be enforced? Because I would wager that we don't really enforce our right to privacy. And to which I'd say, yes, absolutely, it should be enforced. And we should examine why that's so necessary. What does privacy actually enable us to do? Do we just bandy it around and say we have the right to privacy, or does it actually pertain to really germane functionings of a republic? Well, the same declaration that I just mentioned earlier recognizes everyone's right to freedom of expression, rights to religion, rights to their opinions, rights to peaceful assembly. These sentiments also closely mirror the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And in order to practice those rights, we actually need privacy. In fact, in constitutional law, we talk about privacy as a penumbra. What that means is that privacy isn't even expressly mentioned in the Constitution or in the Bill of Rights, but it is you can derive it because it is necessary for the exercise of all the other rights that we hold dear, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of peaceable assembly, of expression. Without privacy, it's quite impossible to exercise any of those rights that we need in assembly. And there are a number of terms for what happens when people in surveilled spaces, when people feel that they're being watched, don't express their opinions. It's called preference falsification, chilling effects, self-censorship. We don't get a good sense of what the Republic thinks and feels without the right to privacy.
Thank you. Aditya?
I think the easy answer of yes is just too easy, right? I mean, okay, yes, but what does it really mean? I mean, how many of you click on the accept all for cookies when you go to a new website? How many of you read the terms and conditions when you opened your last social media account, right? So we as consumers, we like to say, yes, it's a human right, but we don't do anything about it. We give it up as soon as we are given little carrot. People will give away their social security number for a free pair of socks, right? So, and again, I'm not joking. That's actually a promotion that I actually availed of. I didn't, but a friend, let me not. My point is the following, right? I think, and this is human nature, there is always a disconnect between what we know is right and what we actually do, right? That is why surveys are never accurate. When you ask people, what do you think about this? They will tell you what is supposed to be the right answer, because their moral values and their cultural values and what the grandmother told them is right is what they will put in the answer. But their behavior is always tied to that gratification, to the benefit. It could be a small gratification or a big gratification. I mean, look, we all talk about this, but then almost all of us probably own stocks in the big tech companies that do not honor the privacy and the data rights. So I think it's a complicated question. Easy is the easy answer, or I should say yes is the easy answer. The hard part, like my boss used to tell me, look, stop admiring the problem and do something about it. Solve the problem. So I think the real question is, how are we going to solve the fact that we are all seemingly agreeing that this is a human right? What do we do about it? That is the real question.
David?
Well, I have to start by saying, to Aditya's point, I am very proud of my sock collection, and it's not a reflection of my blind acceptance of all terms of service. Well, first off, thank you to the Awesome Forum for hosting this event tonight. I tend to come at these issues from a policy, legislative advocacy perspective, so bear with me for a second as I get a little wonky. I think I'm going to yes and much of what was said so far, but rather than say human right, I'm focusing on the inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and property. And I contend in the research that I work on that our digital information, our digital likeness is in fact our property. But it gets to the question of, is this being enforced? How can we enforce it? And anytime lawmakers are engaging here at the Capitol, just down the street on legislative issues, they tend to ask the question, is this the proper role of government? And for me, most succinctly understood, the proper role of government is defined in the preamble of the Constitution. And one of the lines states that we, the people, must secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And liberty is inextricably bound to the notion of privacy. So, should there be legal rights? The answer is yes. The theoretics indicate that it's the role of government. Our reasonable expectation as consumers indicates yes, we have that expectation to privacy. And we are starting to see states stepping up. So, in Texas, this most recent legislative session, we passed the Texas Data Privacy Security Act. And in essence, what it does is it gives Texans, when the bill goes into effect next year, the right to know what information is being collected, to opt out of data collection, to delete inaccurate information and correct information companies store on you. All that to say, what it does is fundamentally shifts the model to a recognition that that expectation is now being enforced by state law. And there's going to be a lot of discussion tonight about the different landscapes, federal, local, and state. But it is encouraging that we have lawmakers in Texas, Virginia, California, and other states stepping up to the reality that polling indicates one thing. Are we actually going to let the rubber meet the road in this really important topic?
Thank you. The second question is data sharing, which you just mentioned, is data sharing more beneficial or negative for individuals? And what about for society? Aditya, we'll start with you this time.
It's absolutely beneficial. I mean, look at the wonders of social media. Look at the wonders of Google search. Look at the wonders of us being able to go on Amazon and get exactly what we want without having to search for hours, right? So I think the benefits are obvious. I think the question is, how do we protect ourselves from the harm that some people will inevitably try to cause others, right? So I don't think it's going to be difficult to agree on, yes, there is a benefit to data sharing, but doing it in a way that protects people from harm. And that's exactly why I feel like the guardrails are important, right? We need to think about not just what consumers think and what is right or wrong, but again, what tools are in place for people to be able to protect themselves from other people doing bad things to them, and what can the government do, what can the legal system do, what can technology companies do, what can open platforms do to keep the bad guys away, knowing that there are tremendous benefits to data sharing done in a controlled way for the benefit of most people.
David, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the cop out and say this is a pretty complex question to answer. And namely because when you don't have the transparency and full understanding of what information is being collected, to whom it's being shared, and how it's being used, it's really hard for at an individual level to be informed as to what it is you're giving up. You know what you're getting in exchange if it's a free social media service, let's say, but what is the cost? And without knowing that, the individual level makes it a little nebulous. But what I would say is that there are certainly reasonable Americans, myself included, who recognize the convenience that comes from tailored services, interoperability, targeted ads. And sometimes they can be frustrating and annoying, but we know that there are conveniences that come with it. To Aditya's point, when we're looking to minimize the harms, that's one of the things where anyone who will listen to me, I will try and share the stories of where harms have befallen consumers. And what's really concerning is that I can point to 100 stories in the last year, but this dates far before actually when I was even born in the early 1990s. One of the stories that Texas lawmakers highlighted this session as kind of a rallying cry was that of Amy Boyer, whose information was shared online. And a very, well, not even sophisticated, but a very motivated actor was able to purchase all of her personal information, where she lived, geolocation information. And because she was upset that she was dating another guy, cyber stalking turned into physical stalking, turned into showing up at her place of residence and killing her. So we can't ignore or minimize those inherent harms. And I know we mentioned polling. Our organization conducts frequent polls in concert with WPA Intelligence, which is a pretty reputable polling organization that works with likely Texas voters. What we found is that 90% of Texans believe they should be in the driver's seat when it comes to their personal information, meaning they opt in to the data sharing so they have more information on who's using it and have more control over that, what is currently an unfettered data sharing market.
Thank you. Anastasia?
Well, absolutely. There's a difference between how individuals and how society values privacy. There's actually benefits to both. And obviously, individuals benefit from the convenience of being able to log in however they want and quickly or share their data, their location data really easily. Society also benefits, particularly in science and in drug discovery. But unfortunately, these benefits have been vastly, vastly overshadowed by the societal harms of the attention and ad tech economy. And I really take exception at putting the onus on individuals to value their privacy themselves. It's well known that individuals are going to make the calculus based on how convenient and how quick they're going to be able to get to the article that they want to read, or how quickly they're going to be able to buy the thing they want to buy. It's very difficult to value the full extent of your data footprint based on one action. We know that the value of the data economy is based on aggregation. And so individuals are very bad arbiters of the value of the information exchanged. So when we talk about, users giving away their data in exchange for free socks, well, that's because they are just looking at the sock. They are not looking at the second, third, and fourth order consequences of the aggregate information that they share. And so we should really be particularly concerned about this kind of thing in an election year, because our aggregate data footprint, the data exhaust that we leave behind, is what's going to be used against us to hyper target us with specific information to get us to think, act, and vote a certain way. And that's an aggregate harm that an individual is very poorly placed to be able to evaluate when they're purchasing a sock.
Jay, is data sharing more beneficial or negative for individuals, and what about for society?
Well, in the early days, we used to say, well, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Nowadays, they know what kind of dog you are. They know how often you clip your nails. They know where you get your teeth done as a dog. They know everything about you as a dog in the internet. So we started out with the principle of anonymity. We did that for a reason, the same reason that when the United States was formed, people worried about freedom of conscience. People worried about, would you know what religion I am? Would you know where I practiced, what I did at church, all of those kinds of things. So the concepts that we're talking about are embedded in the creation of America and where we are today. So data sharing as it's practiced today is a negative. It is a huge negative. Why? Because we have zero control over the situation. Why do we have zero control over the situation? Because there was never a legal structure determined when we began building the individual components of the internet to allow us to create ownership of our own identity. So we're talking a lot about privacy, but just like the early founders talked about conscience, we now have to talk about digital identity and how that works, because that is where our behavior is expressed, right? So before it was, where did you go to church? Which prayers did you say? Which God did you pray to? Those kind of things. Now it's, where do you shop? What did you buy? When did you buy it? What did you buy it for? Who would you give it to? Right? All of those kinds of things. And so it's a huge negative that has to be addressed, which we'll be talking about in some of our other questions.
Indeed. Anastasia, we'll start with you. Should data sharing be governed by U.S. federal law, state law, local law, or none?
I want to shock the audience here and say it's none of the above, but it's not for the reason that you might think. I'm actually a staunch privacy advocate. I did my graduate thesis on ending surveillance capitalism, and I'm appalled at how dreadfully we fail to protect individual privacy. But that's because we've been doing privacy protection all wrong. Our entire approach is incorrect. See, we try to define privacy as this universal thing that carries the same definition for all users, all data types, across all contexts, across all digital surface areas. But that's not how privacy works. Privacy is actually highly contextual. And your privacy boundaries as a user expand and contract depending on your context. For example, if you're in a doctor's office, your privacy boundaries are going to be a little bit broader because you want to share data easily between healthcare professionals. But if you're at the Thanksgiving table, maybe you have more narrow privacy boundaries. But what exogenous privacy frameworks like GDPR, CCPA, the 11 state laws that we have that don't actually end up protecting anybody, is they try to govern privacy universally for all users across all contexts, which is tantamount to trying to predict the future. If you're trying to envision how a user is going to exactly interact with exactly what type of data across what type of context, it's ungovernable. And that's because we architected, to your point, identity entirely wrong. When we provision ourselves onto the internet, it's not us that provision ourselves, it's companies, and we agree to their terms of service. The only way that we can govern privacy correctly, contextually, is by giving control over identity data and privacy expectations back to the users.
David?
Sure. So I'm gonna push back a little bit on Anastasia, not because she's incorrect about the architecture of how we're looking at this legislatively. Where I'm coming at this practically, let's take a step back for a second here. Theoretically, I'd like to see a federal framework, all 50 states complying with the same state law, and not just for, same federal law, not just for the industry talking point of ease of compliance and making sure they have smaller pods of legal teams so it's easier to enforce it, but because that is a role of the federal government. I think I established that earlier on. But in terms of states not fully addressing the entire landscape of data privacy, while I don't disagree, it's both the practical of giving consumers control. So in Texas, for example, you can petition to the Office of Attorney General saying that your digital agency or your digital trust has been violated by these companies who know what they have to comply with, but are completely abdicating their responsibilities. So that's one piece, is a sense of restorative agency that comes to the Texan in the case of the Texas state law or California, Virginia, and so on. And we're going to see, with states stepping up, industry recognizing, look, we can't have a patchwork of 50 state laws, so let's push action at the federal level. And we saw most recently in Biden's executive order on artificial intelligence, he once again called for congressional action to pass the American Data Privacy Protection Act or some similar law, because the recognition is that, yes, to Anastasia's point, things are moving at a breakneck speed, and Congress is woefully behind the 8 ball on this one, but we can't do nothing because it signals to companies, it signals to consumers that there isn't any role the government wants to play in safeguarding that trust and agency for us. And I want to touch on the local government piece, because this is something that's interesting. You see in all state laws that have passed across the country, in the dozen or so, that they explicitly preempt local government action in this space. And that's partly due to not having 5,000 different local government laws throughout the country, but also to work toward that uniformity that so many people want.
Jay?
Well, just to get in trouble, since we've gone this far in all per agreement, the problem here is definition. Right. The problem is that when we think about both data, what does data mean? What's the difference between data and information? What does privacy actually mean? Where does that come from? So if you're writing a regulation about something, first you have to define it. And to Anastasia's point, because context is so important in all of the ways we share and do things with data, this concept that we're going to write a regulation that's less than the size of the omnibus budget is almost ridiculous, right? It's just too hard to be able to do that, which again is why we have to go back to principles when we're trying to do this. So we made some decisions when we were forming things around the internet. One of the reasons the internet came into being was because this thing called TCP, the Transmission Control Protocol Internet Protocol, existed. And it existed and worked because it was a protocol that was designed to survive a nuclear disaster. So in other words, it simply operated on the fact that I'm going to yell something out, and if somebody out there wants it, they're going to get it. Not, I'm going to send you something, you're going to acknowledge it, I'm going to make sure you're who you are, we're going to make sure you do everything you're supposed to, and then I'm going to give it to you. That was another protocol called token ring for those old folks in the audience. But anyway, the fact is that when we decided to underlie all of the internet with those kinds of things, it was a philosophical decision. We knew what we were doing. Everybody decided that so that we'd be able to do it. We're now at the state to where we have to do those similar kinds of things. Of course, that proliferated many browsers and many data sets. So we invented a standard called HTML. We had different ways of trying to secure the communication between a server and a client inside of a web browser. We created the hypertext transport PS, right? HTTPS for secure transport, another standard. So to my mind, this is not necessarily a governmental intervention, legislative thing that's required. It's a series of interoperability standards that are required for us to be able to do this, that are based on a shared set of principles determined by the citizens of an individual country.
Thank you.
It's a global problem.
I have a rebuttal.
Okay, go for it.
I wholeheartedly disagree that in having any kind of state laws, we're at least doing something. I think that it's actually harmfully It's actually a harmful action, and it's substantively harming my personal privacy to have state laws or any types of laws governing privacy, because all they do is give people a false sense of confidence that someone who understands this topic, has studied it, has done something. And so as a result, what I end up using is an internet that's full of cookie pop-ups that don't substantively improve my privacy, that actually hamper my ease of use and my user experience on the internet. But I am no better off in being able to figure out how to revoke consent to my data, how to revoke consent to my digital exhaust. I mean, if you think about it, online, your data is your digital body. In physical spaces, I can easily revoke consent, to the parts of my body that I don't want touched. But in digital spaces, I have no idea how to do that. And I don't know how a patchwork of 11 state laws is helping me get there.
Thank you. Aditya, should data sharing be governed by U.S. federal law, state law, local law, or none of the above?
No, I'm not a lawyer, and I hate to say this, but I agree with Anastasia. Okay, I didn't want to say this, but I have to be honest. Look, I think it is absolutely contextual. It is absolutely personal, and I feel like the key word here is control as opposed to privacy, and control bottom up, not top down. As an example, I might be perfectly fine with sharing with this audience that my blood group is A positive. What's the problem in that? Now, if HIPAA says, oh, you can't share health information, but I just did. I told you my blood group. Why? Because if I have a heart attack right now, maybe one of you here has A positive blood and can make me alive. So that control should not come top down based on some lawmaker's understanding or lack thereof of what is important to which individual. It's my choice. Again, contextual. It is also a cultural context, right? I might be okay with sharing that I had a 3.4 GPA in my master's. Maybe you're not. Okay. And it's a very cultural thing, right? I might be okay with saying that, my parents got married before they were the age of 21, which is not true, but I'm just saying as an example. In some cultures, that may not be okay to share. So it's very individual, it's very contextual. And the more control and the more agency, I know that's the name of your company, you can give to the individual, which is why there are so many fantastic facets in the Web3 movement, which we have to learn from. Okay, I think there is absolute beauty in trying to do things bottom up, trying to have individuals in control. Again, that's the key word: control of their data, their privacy, their anonymity. There's a fancy word for that, pseudonymity, right? And that extends to not just the creators and the users, but also their creations. And I think that is the kind of stuff that excites me.
Thank you.
I've got a quick rebuttal to that, if that's okay.
Go for it, David.
You're absolutely entitled in this context here to share what your blood type is, what your GPA is. What the state laws seek to do is to empower you to volunteer up that information if you so choose. So let's say you gave that information to me in confidence and I shared it to this entire audience here without you consenting to me sharing it. That was your agency and control and sharing with me, but not to the entire audience. So I just say to the tech lobbyists that were shuddering during the legislative session for fear of this state law going into effect, I'd like to add that it's not just the agency and control that consumers get to share that health information or to share the GPA you had in your graduate program, but it's also the notion that it's enforced with penalties. $7,500 per violation adds up really quick when there are 30 million Texans who have their data privacy laws violated. It is not perfect. I want to be crystal clear. There's a lot more we can do, but it signals we're heading in the direction of making sure tech companies wake up to the reality that the trust in these companies is at an all-time low, and it's time we listen to consumers who feel they're completely forgotten by these companies.
I think my wife is going to call me and say it was actually 3.8, not 3.4. I don't care.
Okay.
4.3 is why I didn't share.
Okay. Our next question. We're getting warmed up here. And David, you seem to be on a roll, so we'll start with you.
Okay.
Should
Great.
content creators and makers be compensated for the use of their works in generative AI models?
Yes.
Heard a lot about this topic lately.
Yeah, no, it's 2023, and just as in 2020, the talking point was I'm on mute. I'm sorry. 2023, it's Gen AI or Chat GPT. So let's jump in. For the sake of Gen AI, I think you can still apply the same principles we're talking about here tonight to this discussion. So taking a step back, The idea that content creators and creatives have ownership over their work is so fundamentally basic that I don't think a reasonable person would assume otherwise, right? And so at the very bare minimum, we need to work towards systems that ensure that there is consent and opting in for these creatives to have their works used, because what we're seeing is companies pirating their creative works, their life's work, what they devote 40 to 80 hours a week working on, to companies that are profiting off of their art. And like the early days of Facebook, it feels like we're in the move fast and break things component of Gen AI. And there are reasonable arguments that in the AI race, we need to ensure we have unfettered development and growth so we don't get bested by China in the race to AI supremacy, whatever that means. But again, we're talking about entertainment or content that is generally frivolous in nature, and not AI systems that are safeguarding our International Atomic Energy Agency protocols. This is the creative works of artists training DALL-E 2 and other image generating AI models. And one thing I'd add, because I hear a lot from the libertarian vein about the trade-off component that comes from sharing personal information in exchange for a free service, right? So we hear this, Facebook, it's okay, we accept it because we're getting a good custom service, right? Well, when looking at, let's take OpenAI, ChatGPT 4, their systems being trained on a petabyte of data, that's a new word for me. I'd not heard petabyte until like 2 months ago. That's 1,000 terabytes of data, the works of artists and creatives. And its first service, ChatGPT 4, which is not free. So pirating the works of artists to profit off of not a free service, so these artists don't have food to put on the table. So I
Thank
think
you.
that's an important consideration.
Jay?
Yeah, this is a big one. Because the reason it's a big one is because we're all creators. Every single person in this room is a creator. Every day when we write an email, when we make a phone call, when we talk to our friends, everything that we do is an act of creation as human beings. And now today, much of that is recorded. Is this on? Oh yeah. Everything we do is recorded. And so, no, I was just saying everything we do is recorded. This conference is recorded. Everything we say here. All of those are acts of creation.
Even when you think you're not being recorded.
Exactly. Even when you think or don't know you're being recorded. So for example, when you sign that EULA and log into Facebook and you start talking with your friends or your parents or your children or anybody else, you should have an assumed right to privacy that those conversations are yours and yours alone between you and the other person. But as ex-Twitter, I still can't just say X yet, as ex-Twitter has just shown, that not only, is everything on there being used for their new generative AI project without, I mean, they didn't ask me, and I've been on since the beginning. I doubt they asked. If anybody asked, did Elon call anybody? Okay, yeah. Oh, no, okay. So the fact is that all of these companies have been doing this, and they've been doing it since the beginning of time. I mean, try and imagine if, for example, every police camera, that exists in the world that have been recording actions since the 70s when those started to exist was suddenly exposed, and that everybody could see every one of those, or that every conversation, that you ever had across an old AT&T POTS phone line had been recorded. Oh, wait, it was recorded. I'm sorry. Yeah, that they have all that too. So the fact is, what if it was all exposed? Oh, and by the way, it's indexed to you personally, so that I can do things, or that you looked up and you saw an AI representation of yourself that was generated out of your children, of your dead grandparents, of anybody else. You would immediately know that something's wrong. And that's the state of where we are. So all
Thank you,
creators
Jay.
need the ability to own their own identities. And
Thank you. Aditya?
I think the common sense answer is yes, right? I think a creator should have the ability to say, my work is okay to be used by a model for training or not. I think right now they start with the assumption that it's okay, and they started with the logic that, hey, we have been inspired by other people's works since the beginning of time. What's the problem, right? I did something just like a human being can look at my work and create a derivative work. Why can't a machine do the same thing? I don't think it's the same thing, because we are all trained to give credit when we are inspired by somebody, right? When we write a research paper and we read 15,000 things to create our 15 pages, we have to list all of them out in the bibliography, right? That is what we do. That is what humans have been trained to do. That's a cultural thing. And whether or not there is a law that requires a PhD paper to have that, it's immaterial. It's not what the law says, it's what common sense says, right? Now, where is the common sense when the AI model learns from your work, especially when your work shows up on the internet as a bootleg copy, right? And you did not authorize that bootleg copy to be there. You learn from it, and now you make the argument in court, hey, it's been happening for centuries. What's the problem? I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem.
Anastasia,
But
should
let-
I
content
got a quick
creators-
rebuttal.
All right.
Quick rebuttal on that.
Hey,
So I just want to point this out. All of these companies know exactly what they are doing. They
course they
did
do.
not go, oh, well, I just thought I was just going to do what everybody else did. We created a file called robots.txt in 1994. Okay. And that file was on every single website. Why was it there? It was to tell people to not search that website. That was its original purpose when it was there, so that it would prevent exactly things like this. Were we naive thinking that, everybody would have that cultural behavior and that things wouldn't do it? No, people started looking for ones with robots.txt, and then we wrote other things and oh, that's where the cookie came from. Oh yeah. Well, that didn't work out very well. So my point earlier that I was saying around standards in those things and legal structures related to that to be able to enforce, those standards. But before you can enforce something, you have to have a way to see it, right? You can't enforce something unless you can see it. And again, that's back to the issues of standards. But these companies, trust me, they know exactly what they're doing.
I have to disagree with my colleagues here. We should be thinking of AI models more like students, not pirates or Xerox machines. Large language models don't copy works of art. They, like you and I, ingest, read, study these works. So something comes in, and what comes out on the other end is actually very different. It's not a copy. It's inspired by what it's read. It's inspired by what it's learned. And it's very different. It's not very different from how humans learn, right? When we practice science, when we do art, when we write literature, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. There's no such thing as a truly original work. It's all derivative. If it's all derivative, then how is AI different, right? Which brings me to my second point. I see this as a kind of modern day Orientalism. What is Orientalism? It is a Western scholarly discipline that came about in the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century, that studied Asian countries as if they were intrinsically inferior to Western countries and in need of Western intervention. It otherized things that the Western academic mind did not understand. And I believe that these types of attitudes towards AI, towards a new sentience, are a modern version of Orientalism.
So I have a rebuttal, and maybe it's a rebuttal to a rebuttal and whatever, right? So let's go back to common sense again, right? I think you make the point that we've been doing it forever. Humans have been doing it forever, but there is a massive difference between a human being doing it with the capacity of their brain versus a machine doing it with the capacity of a zillion brains, okay? And I think that is a big difference. And I think back to the point of agency, I think common sense again tells me that if the creator does not want their work to be used, that is their choice. Simple. I don't know how you can disagree with that.
I also, Anastasia only got 1 minute on that, so I just want to point that out. If you want a minute, it's cut short.
Oh, I thought it was short. You. Oh, lovely. I
This better be
retract
good, though.
all
This better
rebuttals
confirm my
past
point.
and future.
Too
I
many
vehemently
rebuttals.
agree with everything my esteemed colleague says.
Right.
Ooh, there's my water.
I'll take it.
Yeah, I actually think it's really important to the last point I was making about modern day Orientalism. We have to come to grips with what it means when we are facing the dawn of a new sentience. And I do really want people to think about this seriously. I'm not joking. We like to think of AI as a technology, but does AGI continue to be a technology? When we talk about AGI, artificial general intelligence, which Sam Altman at yesterday's Dev Day conference talked about that as their mission. When we create a general intelligence that is sentient, is it still subject to the same subjugating laws that we apply to technology? Or do we grapple with its intelligence the same way that we might grapple with our own intelligence, in that we can't give credit to everyone that inspires us? We just stand on shoulders of giants.
was a timing kerfuffle with the lesson. I'm going to let you go first. We'll share the sharing economy. How are we now? Oh, we're much better. So, Anastasia, you're going to go first this time.
Thank you.
And we're on a roll with the AI theme. So, should individuals have legal rights over the use of their digital likenesses, such as voice, appearance, etc., in AI generated content and uses?
Absolutely, and they already do. But I think the question is specifically about deepfakes and whether current laws are sufficient to protect individuals from their likenesses being used to generate deepfakes. I think with the speed that generative artificial intelligence is evolving, it really does beg the question: are our current laws future proof enough? But let me just first say that there can be beneficial and benign uses of deepfakes, right? For example, political commentary, parody, or anonymization of somebody that's needing to protect their identity. So this knee-jerk reaction that many people have towards any new tech that could be used for awful purposes really doesn't make a lot of sense, because we don't entirely know how this tech is going to be used. The fact is, we already have current laws that can protect individuals. If a deepfake is used for criminal purposes, we have criminal law that can protect them. On the tort side, false claims commonly address photo manipulation, right, and distortion. We can use right to publicity. We can use copyrighted material. There are plenty of current laws that can protect people against deepfakes that affect their identities.
David?
Yes. Well, yes is my answer to the question. And to Anastasia's point, one of the things that I want to highlight for a second here, she mentioned existing laws comporting with new technology, and she's absolutely right that part of the new emerging tech space, we always need to ensure we're not over-regulating for the sake of being reactionary, and seeing what case law, what existing legislation can we apply to the new tech space. There's one thing I want to highlight, or two things I want to highlight actually. And the first is regarding pornographic deepfakes. And there was a story in the Wall Street Journal last week talking about a gal at a New Jersey high school who walked into the classroom, and there was a group of boys snickering when she walked by. And she later found out it's because they were sharing a nude photo of her, a 14-year-old girl in a high school, a nude photo that she had not taken that was generated using deepfake technology. And you're hearing stories like this crop up all across the country. And what's really confounding and concerning is another case I was reading about. There were over a dozen girls targeted by one man who created child sex abuse material using deepfake technology, who served 6 months in prison for disseminating pornographic content without the consent of these underage girls. And so when concerning the prurient interests or the sexual interests associated with this deepfake technology, I think there's absolutely room to ensure that we're strengthening protections so criminals know that the penalties are incredibly strong, because 6 months for ruining the lives of 12 young girls is certainly not a fair or just system. The second thing, this last week, I believe it was, Scarlett Johansson has been in the news for a lawsuit she slapped on an AI company, which used a video of her on the set of one of her movies to basically co-opt her likeness, her voice, and everything to be a spokesperson for this AI company, of which she knew nothing about and she had no support of. And I bring up the lawsuit component here because this is another fascinating case where it's the for-profit nature of stealing the identity of an individual so another company can profit off it. I think that's another area where we need to see new legislation emerge to ensure that we're protecting.
Thank you, David. Aditya?
Look, I think it's hard to argue that these are real harmful things that are happening in society, right? Which there is no justification, there is no excuse, right, to say anything else. So I like to think of how do we again solve it, right? I think we are understanding the problem, but we need to have practical tools to be able to address the problem. I think what the internet lacks, and for all the wonderful things that people like Jay and others have done over the years, in kind of the foundational blocks of the internet, what we still don't have is enough of a trust layer. We need a trust layer on the internet, because what that allows us to do then is to know where something came from, who something came from, who is behind it, for better or for worse, right? If you can establish the provenance, another big word I've learned recently, but is becoming very important. If you can establish the provenance of all content that we are consuming, then if somebody is creating harmful content, then law enforcement can go after that person. If you don't even know where it came from, who do you go after? Right? I mean, do you go and you put a bunch of source code in jail? I mean, look, we have practical issues of enforcement. You have to go back to the human being who is going to say, I did it. If I did it, if I did a good job, I want to get the credit for it. If I did it and I hurt somebody, put me in jail. I think the trust layer is something that we need more tools out there, easily available, easily usable, embedded within people's daily lives, so that we can address the problem, and then we stop only worrying about the problem, but we do something about it.
Jay?
So three.
Yep.
So there are three ways to share microphones. Now, sharing is a really important part of all of this, because sharing that identity is a challenge. Because what if you didn't do it? What if you're a dissenter in a country that kills the dissenters? You're going to say who the origin and the creator of that content was? So yeah, okay, we erred on the side of anonymity when we built all the initial stuff in the internet, but we did that for a purpose, because I believe truly without that, the internet would not have come to exist in every country, in every corner of the world, and have 5 billion people using it today without that kind of anonymity and those kinds of things that we had. So there's three things we need to do. First of all this generative AI stuff, it needs to be recognized that those generative AIs are people too, which means they need to be regulated like people. They need to be under the citizenship of the country, the state, the local area that they're used in, the way they're designed. It all needs to be part of the design. Just going to go to the old-fashioned way. Because it's very important that they have rights and obligations and responsibilities and conform to the laws where they're existing, just like we as citizens do in all the things that we do. That's number one. And by the way, there's a perfect example of this. Corpore, otherwise known as corporations. Corporations are not humans, right, either. But we created an entire body of law out of them for them to be able to exist outside of the human body, right, for them to have things to do. So it's not like we don't have precedents or know how to do this. And I may take an extra 6 seconds for microphone handling. So second, the second most important thing that needs to be done related to all of these things that we're talking about is we've got to determine, is that centralized or decentralized? In other words, where does this repository live, right, of who's who, and how does it work? And how do we deal with that, right? Because that's a very complex question. And I'll save the last one for when we get to the last question.
Thank you, Jay. Next question. How should society address disinformation with harmful intent? Aditya, we'll start with you.
And maybe we can continue from the earlier conversation. I don't want to disagree with Jay. I feel like I would love to again, but I don't want to. I think the issue here is that I understand the notion of corporations being entities who can be put in jail, so to speak, in quotes. Here's the problem. We as humans know how to trust humans. Okay, we as humans do not know how to trust lines of code. It's just not what we do. So my point is that we have to have a way to identify the human behind anything that we read or see. Now, you will say, okay, how about the situation when a person could be harmed by saying, I did it? And so that's why I like the notion of pseudonymity, right? I think it's important for us to know that this came from a human, not a machine, one. If that human wants to stay anonymous or pseudonymous, that should be their choice. And for all the reasons that you talked about, I agree. And I think that is how we start dealing with misinformation, disinformation in a practical way. I think there is the ideal, let me call it the utopian way of everything fully decentralized, everything on the blockchain, everything completely self-sovereign. That is the ideal. I don't think we can get there overnight. I mean, how long have we talked about self-sovereign identity? For a long time. How long, right? How long have we tried, to incentivize people to, manage their data and monetize their data? Well, people don't do that. We have seen it doesn't work. There is roadkill along the way of startups who have tried and failed. My vote here is for pragmatic, practical tools, one step at a time to get there. We can get there overnight, is my point.
Rebuttal.
So raise your hand if you trust corporations. Oh, okay. Thank you. There's one. Good. We'll see you later. I've got something to sell you. So 2, how many people here trust, all the AI things you hear about? So my point is, we don't trust corporations. Don't trust very many things. We don't trust, how many people trust everybody in this room? Okay, there's a few of the free love people out here. Okay. My point is, we don't trust, right? Human trust is something that's very seldom given, right? It's not something that we do every day. In fact, it's the opposite, right? We trust but verify. We have all kinds of ways that we say these things. And so to some way, we need to change the conversation from this concept of privacy and trust and all those things, because that's not really what it's about. What it's about is, can we live with it, right? Can we live with AGI? How will we live with AGI? We don't trust corporations, but we all use them. Heck, anybody here, how many people work for a corporation? Okay, almost everybody. The rest of y'all, I don't know where y'all work, but that'll be cool. So my point here is that, we have to build a new way to deal with this. That's not like the utopian situation that's here. That's not pie in the sky.
Thank you. David?
Great. I'm going to bring us back to disinformation as much as I enjoy the back and forth here. But I think it actually ties in. And for this question, I'm not going to talk about legislation. So yay. We're talking about society's approach to disinformation as a quick refresher, because mis and disinformation get conflated so often. Disinformation is when the sender knows the information is false, sending it with the intent to deceive, which can result in misinformed or uninformed persons sharing that thinking it's in fact. So since the Garden of Eden, the dawn of time, this has been an issue. Information asymmetries, lack of trust, we all have trust issues here at this debate tonight, means that there's always going to be bad actors sharing disinformation. That's not a cop-out to say we ignore it, but society as the vehicle to address this means it's incumbent upon us in our homes, in our communities, in our schools to teach critical thinking skills so we can ascertain fact from fiction, because there's always going to be new vectors that emerge. Now it's social media, which is really just blowing up disinformation. But then there's generative AI and new ways that systems or models may be trained on what is misinformation or disinformation. So bringing it back to the dinner table, to schools, and those forums are the appropriate way to ensure we have the critical thinking skills to really address and grapple with disinformation's rampantness in society.
Thank you. Anastasia?
Yeah, we have got to make it easier for people to be able to establish harm when it comes to harm that comes from digital environments. This is the reason that so few corporations have been prosecuted for anything that they've done with respect to misinformation or disinformation. When we think about physical spaces, if an engineer builds a bridge and the bridge falls into the bay, or or an aerospace engineer builds a jet and the jet falls out of the sky, they don't get to keep their job. They're not proud to be engineers anymore, right? And someone's been substantially harmed. There's criminal liability here. The same thing does happen in digital environments. Digital environments have structural integrity or lack thereof, just like physical ones do. The problem is that the causal chain is much harder to demonstrate and establish, right? The harms are sort of diffuse, they aggregate over time, and then it's really hard to establish standing. It's kind of a class action lawsuit, and it's really hard to bring to court. But it's very easy to sue an engineer who built a bridge that fell into the bay, because it's so clear, the causality. But that doesn't mean the causality isn't there. We have seen for example, the January 6th insurrection, that is a direct result of hyper-targeted misinformation that is going specifically after people who are susceptible based on their digital footprint, based on their data exhaust, to be primed with the right information they need to see to get them to act a certain way. And so if we want to address disinformation with harmful intent, we have to start to address how easy it is for people to be able to establish digital harm, because it's a very diffuse environment. We concentrate costs or concentrate benefits of product design to the end user. We're designing a product for this end user. It's great. It's super addictive. We love using this platform. But the costs are externalized and diffused throughout society, and society bears this cost. And that is the problem. It's very hard to make the companies pay for that diffuse cost.
Thank you. We have reached our final question. Should government agencies enforce the responsible use of AI? David, we'll start down there and just come along the line here.
Okay. And I think beforehand we were chatting about how the word responsible is a pretty nebulous word. So when thinking about responsible AI systems and who should regulate that, we've got to think about what we want to incorporate or how we want to incorporate the word responsible. The way I look at this is transparency and human dignity should be enmeshed within our AI systems. And by transparency, we have a reasonable understanding that it is an AI system or an automated decision-making system that we're interacting with. And human dignity, much to the work of what Professor Greenberg works on at Good Systems, we're looking to bolster humanity. So tech serving humanity and not the other way around. And now we get into the whole discussion on the executive order. We have the European Union's AI Act. We have states that are legislating in this space. Who is the right actor here? I think at the end of the day, what we need to see, or my answer to this is more the approach that different governments are taking indicate what the right actor is. And the federal government has some good guidelines, and there's certainly a lot of ambitious goals. My concern is that with the agency or regulatory capture that we've seen in other industries where the federal government takes a really outsized role in shaping with broad brushes how industry should innovate or should adapt, we could quash innovation. And to kind of counteract that, Texas has an interesting model they passed this session, which is an artificial intelligence advisory council, similar to what Biden created with his executive order. But the difference is, first and foremost, the goal is to study how AI systems are used in state government. And I think that's important from both a taxpayer perspective. How is our money funding automated decision-making systems? And two, for the folks not in this room who really don't know what's going on with AI, it's hard to define and it's really hard to understand how it's interfacing with us in our everyday life. The first goal is to create awareness on that. And secondarily, approaches should be sector specific rather than broad brush. What's responsible in healthcare might be different in transportation.
Thank you.
Justice.
Aditya?
Look, I'm not in general a fan of, top-down things. Look, I mean, it's kind of a crude analogy, but the whole Affordable Care Act, instead of being 6,000 pages, could have been 3 bullet points. Okay, sleep more, eat well, and work out more. Okay, the problem is people don't take responsibility for their actions. They know they need to, but they don't. So speaking of responsible AI, I don't think it's the responsibility only of the big tech companies and corporations to make AI responsible. Making AI responsible is everybody's responsibility. The users of AI, the consumers, people who are, using ChatGPT, people who are creating bots. And now you will say, how do they do that? Well, that's why we need to give them tools. And again, I think that's why it needs to be a bottom-up, effort where there is enough tools and utilities and ways for people to become more responsible in embracing this new technology called AI. It should not be just top-down. It has to be bottom-up as well.
Anastasia?
There
Should
are
government
already
enforce responsible use of AI?
timer. Okay. There are already plenty of laws that govern technology, and AI is included in technology. It's not like some sort of regulatory tax haven. There are laws that apply to AI. But should we have some sort of new agency that is the arbiter of what is responsible and not? Absolutely not. We should not have that right now because one, we can't agree on what responsible means, and two, we don't yet know what is emerging. This is a highly emergent phenomenon. We don't know what to regulate because we haven't actually seen what the use cases are. For example, it was just yesterday that we learned that now I can create my own GPT agent for a particular use. That is an emergent property of the fact that there's a large language model, which in turn emerged from deep learning and natural language processing. So it's really impossible to imagine anybody, no matter how august and practiced in their work, to exogenously devise some sort of scheme to regulate something that hasn't even fully evolved yet. We don't yet know what it's going to look like or what it's going to be able to do. I think that to my earlier point about civil engineers and aerospace engineers being very different from software engineers, I think this comes down to engineers taking responsibility for their products, for the structural integrity of the digital environments that they create. We should be imposing the same types of expectations of responsibility on people who create products, who build buildings, jets, and platforms, because as I've said, harm is no less real when it comes from a digital space than from a jet falling out of a sky. So I would like to see industry self-policing, regulating itself, and really maturing a little bit more than it has over the last 20 years of digital media, where it really has been a move fast and break things paradigm. And now it's time for software engineers to become, aerospace engineers.
Thank you, Jay. What do you think?
Well, how many people here think the Atomic Energy Commission has done a great job? I do, because we're still here. So, I just kind of make that as a general statement, right? Because if they'd done a crappy job, we wouldn't be here. So I think it is possible for government agencies to have a role in regulating unknown tech, because they began regulating the tech before Oppenheimer and all of his friends started working on what actually became one of the most powerful things that have ever been created. And it's very possible that AGI is something of that order of magnitude in terms of what's being created. So there's certainly a role for that kind of thing. There's certainly a role for international bodies to participate on this, the International Atomic Energy Commission, people that regulate what goes on with nuclear materials in the world. So again, like my other colleagues here, I'm not generally a fan, well, except for one, of large government stepping in and doing things. But in this case, maybe it's necessary. But if so, right, that still needs to be governed in a way that it doesn't stifle industry, right? That it doesn't restrict those kind of things, like the intent of some of the state legislature things that they've been doing, trying to foster, how do we let this still create, but still have it, regulated in some way, right? So as we think about all of this, I don't think it's reasonable for us to expect every citizen to understand AGI. It's just not going to happen. It's very complex. How many people understand here how atomic energy works? Probably a few. Okay, Jay, raise your hand back there. The physicist in the room. There's a few of you. I know who you are. So my point is, though, we have to actually let groups of experts, we have to let people that can understand these kind of things try and figure out these things. Again, working with standards, working with companies, working with the individuals that do have a passion for it and do understand those things.
I've got
Thank you very much.
one quick rebuttal, if I can.
Yes.
Just because I don't want to be associated with wanting massive top-down regular regulation on this. No, absolutely not. But I know I love the beckoning to Nuclear Regulatory Commission, IAEA, and so forth. And that's one of the things that I found really stark and revealing in the executive order was that Biden recognized that they needed to hire artificial intelligence experts to work in the White House because they lacked that. So it's not to say the Biden administration didn't do their homework. I know former President Barack Obama was very involved in bringing industry together, but the recognition in the executive order is that they don't fully understand, yet we have 45, 90, 145-day goals to give the Secretary of Commerce massive oversight into shaping this technology. And I know we started this discussion saying we wish there were certain safeguards put in place when we first dawned into the internet age. And that's absolutely to say there can be responsible light touch approaches to regulation in AI, but not a massive top-down approach that lacks the tact, that lacks the technical expertise that ultimately we need to bring to that table to form good policy.
Thank you very much.
One more rebuttal remaining, right? I can use my rebuttal. One more.
Have you used one or two?
I have used one.
Okay.
I have one more. And I think kind of, I don't know whose point it is, David's point, and I think I'm rebutting the two of you. Look, we have to give AGI a chance to flourish a little bit more. And the reason I feel that way is that we don't know what we will learn, because we are going here assuming that assuming the supremacy of human intelligence. Okay. I think we have to understand artificial intelligence enough to say, what more can we do as a planet? I've been reading a book, and this comment is inspired by that. There is plant intelligence, which is very different from human intelligence. Right? Octopuses think very differently than us. They are way smarter than we give them credit for. We don't know what AI will teach us. Why stop it now? Let it flourish a little bit more. Let's all become smarter, on the planet. That's what I would like to say.
I have a rebuttal. One
Okay.
remaining. We have been here before. In the 1990s, the government tried to outlaw encryption. They tried to ban it outright because it was deemed a munition. It was subject to munitions controls because, regular people couldn't just be trusted to encrypt their information. And had the government succeeded, we would not have the $3 trillion e-commerce industry today, or private messaging. But that's an emergent phenomenon. We couldn't have known where encryption was going to take us, nor can we really know where large language models are going to take us. I didn't know before yesterday that I can build my own GPT now. That's an emergent property. But there's not that much that can emerge out of an atomic bomb other than destruction. I don't need that much imagination to see where that emergence goes. So I think I'm comfortable regulating atomic weapons and comfortable sitting back a little bit longer to see where large language models take us.
And with that, we have reached the end of our debate. I want to thank all of our debaters. No, I know.
Esteemed colleagues.
Right.
Colleagues.
We now have an audience question, correct? Okay, yeah, that was the formal part of the debate. We now have a question from the audience, correct?
That's right. So we have time for one question from the audience, which is really a shame because there are about 100 great questions in that channel. And I'm going to ask our participants to chime in on those questions over the coming days. But we have time for one final question from the audience, and it seems highly relevant today. We all know what today is. The question is from Jane Bernhard. Is Jane in the room? Jane, all right. Jane asks, what is the best way to reduce disinformation and misinformation in the 2024 election? 2 minutes each.
Oh, great. I get to start. Wonderful. Thank you. Oh, definitely going to need a 2-minute timer on this one. So the best way to reduce disinformation is education. All right. The challenge is we don't have a lot of time for the 2024, election for people to be educated about things like making sure the sources that you're getting your information from are actually the sources they say they are. There are many, many, many tools that are available to do those kind of things today. Unfortunately, most of them are far too technical for the average user to be able to take and use because they're not easy to use. Why? Because the browsers, which is why we do these kind of things, are constantly engaged in warfare against things that do that so that they control the horizontal and the vertical of what you see through the browser. And so if you've got sources of information where you can subscribe directly to the news source of your choice, whether that's the Wall Street Journal or the Nation or whichever it is, go directly to them, right, to get your information. Do not depend on summaries posted in things like X Twitter. Do not depend on links sent to you by your friends or your bots that seem to be your friends or any of those things. You're going to have to collect the information yourself. And secondarily, actually go talk to people that you respect. Go to coffee, go have a beer, go get on a Zoom meeting with someone that you know and respect and ask them their opinion. Tell them yours. Have discourse. I know it goes all the way back to a long time ago about how we do this, but the best way to determine what you should do is for you to consider it with someone else. Right? Actually tell your view and listen to their view. So creating discourse to me is the best thing that we can do today to reduce disinformation for the 2024 election.
I wish I could say that there would be some way to lock down everybody's data exhaust because it's the data exhaust that purveyors of disinformation prey on, right? They're looking at your data footprint to see what are your predilections? Maybe not your declared preferences, but it looks like you might go that way. And so you're primed with the right content that you need to see at the right time when you're most susceptible to, to vote a certain way or to think a certain way. But I think that ship has sailed. I don't think there's a way other than completely re-architecting identity standards to lock down this data exhaust. So in the absence of that, given that the election is nigh, I'm actually very excited to see the technological solutions that that entrepreneurs will innovate in the next year. I'm looking at how people will develop and deploy AI and machine learning solutions that can detect any kind of synthetic media and deep fakes. And I'm looking for platforms and news media organizations to content tag things that seem controversial with maybe additional context or maybe links to viewpoints that are contrary to the ones that are being purveyed there. Pointing people to where they can see more information. I'd love to see, specifically in the space of large language models, cryptographic verification for data provenance and for model integrity. So that's carried all the way from the training data set all the way to inference stage. I think a lot of the solutions we're looking for are actually in the same technologies that we suspect are harming us if we would just let people innovate instead of taking away that impetus and putting that entire onus on Washington just to find a solution.
Aditya?
So look, while I do agree with Jay's comments that we should engage, we should have a discourse, we should try and have in-person conversations, have a cup of coffee, not always practical, right? We live in a world where, we don't know most of the people who are our so-called friends and connections. But that is exactly where we are consuming information. I think we have to change our habits as consumers, right? We have been fed this aphorism of trust but verify. We're going to flip it around. Verify, then trust. That's what we need to start doing. We need to verify if what we are looking at, what we're reading, is coming from a trustworthy source, then trust that content, not the other way around. We need to change that habit. And obviously, I would not be a good founder if I did not use this to pitch what I'm doing. Identity.ai is doing exactly that. We are helping people establish the provenance that this is something I did, and we're helping people easily see who did what they're seeing and reading. And I think these are tools that need to get out there. We're going to change our habits. We have to know where something came from. Even if you don't think about the current environment, how did you trust a piece of news? You said, who was the author? Or if you saw a picture, who was the photographer? And then you try to do the research. Do I know this person? Do I know somebody who knows this person? Is this a reputed person? Is this a reputed photographer? Is this a reputed author? We did that research in the background. We have somehow stopped doing that. Let's start doing it again. Let's start using digital tools to do that. Let's start giving people the tools to be able to establish that verification before you trust something. That is the paradigm shift, the flipping of trust but verify to verify then trust. That's what we need to do.
Thank you. David?
Stop. We're back. No, we're not. Okay. Fantastic question. And I'll apply the same answer I gave to this information previously here to the idea of civil society stepping up, educating for having critical thinking skills for kids and for really everyone in society. But I'm the last voice here, so I have to say something spicy. And my advice would be delete your social media accounts or stay off your social media in advance of the election. And I don't say that pejoratively or facetiously. The reminder is that social media companies have an interest in getting your eyeballs on the screen as long as you can. They will serve you content in your feed that they know is going to divide you with former friends, with family members. The content that's going to make your blood pressure elevate the most is going to be top of your feed, especially around elections. And I emphasize the need to delete social media because the current landscape, we haven't talked about Section 230 and it's a tech debate, so I'm going to bring it up. Section 230 means social media companies have no liability for any content that's hosted on their websites, which means when Russian disinformation actors are promulgating false information about elections, when Iranians or whoever it is are trying to infiltrate our elections, well, yes, good faith actors are trying to step up. There isn't a strong enough incentive for them to do so. So mic drop moment, delete your social media, come find me after the election and say, David, wow, that was great advice. My mental health has improved dramatically.
Thank you very much. And let's thank Jane. Let's thank Jane Bernhard. You have won South by Southwest badge CJ Boisseau afterwards. And everyone, I want to give a special shout out to Liz here. She has been the timer extraordinaire. Let's give a round of applause for Liz. And of course, for all of our panelists. Thank you so much for a wonderful debate.